Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this rendition of the East to West Project series. We are moving into the end of the year. The East to West series began this year in 2020, and we have been taking our presentations online, as most or many people are at the moment. Thank you for joining us and for being patient with us as we navigate this internet world that is new to many of us. We are in CHOP session, Ruminations of a Black Man Learning and Unlearning How to Build Leadership with Alexander Dixon. My name is Fabiola Torralba, and I'm going to be your host for today. The East to West Project centers the cultural expressions, politics, and histories of descendants of the African diaspora and the interconnections between Indigenous, Latinx, and Black communities. This is a project that is funded through a grant that is being initiated with the support of multiple cultural workers, activists, community organizers, educators, and artists in San Antonio, and also in relation to other individuals who are doing work at this intersection throughout the world. Thank you for joining us. You can follow us on Facebook. If you are familiar with our Facebook group page, please find us there. And just to go a little bit about our agenda today, we will be mostly in conversation with Alexander Dixon, who is going to start off by sharing a little bit about what brings him to the work that he is currently engaged in San Antonio East Side, how he got there, and what he thinks about leadership in the current state of grassroots politics in this time in our city. We will open up the discussion early on to the rest of the folks that are here listening to us. So if you find yourself wanting to ask a question, please do not be bashful. There's no need to wait until we reach a particular moment in the agenda. You are encouraged and welcome to ask questions, interrupt, pretend that you are on your porch, in your kitchen, talking with your neighbors, with your family, just spilling the tea, spilling the beans, however you want to name that. This is really intended to be a conversation that will be, again, with Alexander, but will evolve with our participation. We are going to try to not be so super formal because this is people of color space, people of color time, and we want to make sure that we honor all of those ways of communicating, learning, and engaging with each other. So please interrupt. So Alexander Dixon is an urban planner, planning practitioner, and political organizer. He has a Bachelor of Science in Urban Regional Planning from the Texas State University. I'll let you read the rest of his bio there, but I want to share that I met Alexander Dixon early this year, 2020, at the recommendation of a friend, and we've been in conversation primarily around social justice issues, housing, and racial inequity in the city of San Antonio. We've been kind of walking alongside each other as we ourselves are trying to be effective in our local communities, being responsive to housing displacement, food insecurity, and other issues of inequity that face African American, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and migrant and immigrant communities in the city. So it's with great privilege and pleasure that Alexander Dixon will be joining us to share some of his thoughts on leadership in San Antonio, and specifically African American leadership, Black male leadership, and how we can unite in support of that call. Great. So with that, I will pull up my video and invite Alexander Dixon to join us.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm happy everybody's here today. Hopefully everybody's in good spirits and good health with the pandemic going on, and hopefully you and your family and everyone that you know is safe. And again, I want to thank Fabiola for inviting me to participate in this program. I really appreciate her. She does a lot of good work, and I'm glad everybody's here. I'm ready to kick it off. So I started getting interested, particularly in the east side of San Antonio, growing up in San Antonio. I'm originally from the northeast side of San Antonio. But growing up, I did spend a lot of time on the east side. I had friends over here who played ball over here, AAU, et cetera, et cetera. When I left to go to college at Texas State, we did a lot of learning about the east side. In particular, Obama did the Hope 6 Choice Neighborhood Program, not Hope 6, but the Choice Neighborhood Program, and also the Promise Zone program on the east side. And so there was a lot of talk because it was so close to us in San Marcos, and as an urban planner, you know, stuff from HUD, that's really big to us. And so we were, you know, going over that, studying all the data and going through that. The more and more that I would read in urban planning, like literature and everything, and looking back on like history, I saw that, you know, Black people in particular get the short end of the stick. And in San Antonio, the east side is historically known as the Black side of town. So I wanted to like keep reading and look deeper into exactly what was going on. And so the more that I learned in college, as far as like what we would call the neoliberal aspect of urban planning, the more I kind of had to unlearn that, because I've seen the destruction on, you know, poor, marginalized folks that would happen from, you know, the neoliberal model of urban planning. And so I was one of the first people, like one of the first detractors of the Promise Zone and of the Choice Neighborhood Program that they were using to tear down the Weedy Course housing project. And so I used to get a lot of flack. I used to get a lot of flack about that. I would say that, you know, they're honestly just getting rid of the Black people and, you know, the poor Mexicans as well. Like, that's really what it comes down to. When they talk about they're coming for revitalization and they're coming with mixed income housing, it really means they're just about to get rid of all the poor people, honestly. And so it just made me question the leadership in particular in San Antonio, particularly the Black leadership. Ivy Taylor, I know people don't want me to name drop, but we're gonna go ahead and name drop tonight, it's fine. Ivy Taylor, nice lady. I've met her like once or twice, nice lady. She actually has a very thorough understanding of urban planning. She has a master's from one of the like top urban planning schools in the nation. And she was the councilwoman for District 2 during that whole transition of getting that program here. And as well as she became the mayor as well. And I had an issue with her knowledge of urban planning and development, that she would okay a program like that on the east side as far as like more technocratic and like a top-down approach, and not an actual grassroots community-based approach. And so there's a whole lot of people that were in that kind of, how can I put this, that kind of situation. There was a lot of, in my personal opinion, there was a lot of graft, there was a lot of greed, there was a lot of mismanagement, there was a lot of funny money that was going on with that whole situation. And there's data that can back me up. If you look at, you know, the city of San Antonio's data on poverty, that money that was spent in the promise zone really didn't help much. And some of the money, most of the money didn't even go to the promise zone. I know that out of the 52 million, I think only 4 million was spent in the promise zone. There was an Express News article that talked about how a lot of the money that came to the promise zone actually wasn't spent in the promise zone. And you know, some of the leadership at that time, like Mike Antine, I cannot say his last name, but it's Antien. He was over that. Beverly Watts Davis, she was over some of that federal money. There was a lot of folks that were over these programs that aren't around anymore. And so I just seen from like the East Side in particular, it's a lot of poverty pimping. People would come and they would make them a job, create them a job from the grant money. Like they see you're in poverty, they see you're in misery. They'll see your grief, they'll talk to you, they'll open up their ears and hear your grief just so they can go and use that and run off and grab the grant. And so I see that a lot here, especially here on the East Side. Again, there's a lot of money that was poured to the East Side, but if you frequent the East Side at all, you'll see that not much has changed besides them tearing down and rebuilding the Sutton Homes and the Wheatley Courts East Meadows now. There's still folks that are still jobless. And I mean, it's possibly even worse now because of the investment that came. There's a lot of real estate speculation that came as well. And so now you have Denver Heights. It's one of the most gentrified areas in the city, and people are getting pushed out. They can't afford the rent. They can't afford the increase in property taxes. And so the investment came, but the people that it was supposed to really help and impact for the better actually kind of hurt. And if you look at where the money usually goes to in these situations, it's to nonprofits, it's to city government agencies, private developers, and not really the real stakeholders, not really the real people in the community. There's too much of a technocratic, like top approach and not actual bottom up. And so it inspired me, especially with the COVID situation, that there was a need for leadership. And when I was trying to, you know, find my way, I guess, in the city as far as like an organization or people to get in touch with and like try to do some good work. Some of these people, they lacked integrity. I'll keep it real. Again, a lot of them are poverty pimping. A lot of them don't have the vision. And they lack a lot of integrity around here. I'll keep it real with you. A lot of these so-called people that have been around here for a long time, you know, they just been skirting by and really just pocketing some of the money. And so I realized that there was a lack of real leadership, and there was a lack of a pipeline to actually teach folks in the community, you know, leadership skills, giving them the political consciousness that they would need to actually do for their community, do for themselves and do for their community. And so that's what really led me to start getting more involved, especially with the housing issue as being an urban planner. There's a lot of folks that were getting gentrified out of the East Side. And again, like I said, there's a lot of people that were kind of facilitating pushing out poor Black people, especially, and also poor Latinos as well. And if you're not familiar with the data here in San Antonio, with Bexar County and the whole metropolitan area, we have overtaken Detroit as the #1 poorest like metroplex in the nation. We rank high in economic segregation. And pull a data from the City of San Antonio website, 33.5% of Black households in San Antonio, their household income, median household income is $25,000. That's awful. That's terrible. And these are pre-COVID levels. This is pre-COVID stuff. So ain't no telling how we're disproportionately in, service sector jobs. And, we already had precarious working conditions as it is. COVID just pretty much, like, all the data, as poor as we were previous to COVID, is probably way, 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 way worse now. And if you look at the Black business as well, from the city of San Antonio's data website, only one of that is like 1% of all, small businesses is owned by Black folks here in San Antonio. We actually got 29,000 more Black people from 2010 to 2020. So now our demographics actually went up to 7.4%. And so you have 7.4% in the city, that's, military city USA. So you have Black people that do, would have a little bit of money from retired military or active duty military. There's only still 1% of small businesses owned by African Americans. And if you look at the macro economic issues in the country, 41% of Black businesses have went under since COVID. And so that's terrible. I think it was 441,000 businesses, small Black businesses, have went over since COVID. And I can only imagine here in San Antonio what's going on. And so I've just seen a lack of real progressive leadership. There's a real lack of leadership. And again, these same people on the East Side are certain Black leaders in San Antonio. They've been around for a long time. And there's been no real progress on the East Side. I mean, you judge a fruit by the tree that it bears. You judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. And the East Side, wages haven't gone up. People are in a more precarious situation than they were previously. But all this money was supposed to flow here. And a lot of the money flew out. I know, for instance, now CAB, they got $250,000 from the Promise Zone grant. They only spent $28,000 on the East Side, like in the Promise Zone. And they used that money and ran off and did whatever they did with it. Same thing for the charter schools, Idea School. I think they got like 28 million and only used 1.2 million on the East Side. And so even Mike Antina, I can't say his last name, he even said that even though the federal money was allocated for the Promise Zone, that technically it doesn't matter if they actually use all the money in the Promise Zone. So a lot of this stuff was finesse. And so I see a question, what is neoliberalism? So when I say neoliberalism, it's technically like the privatization, the marketization of assets, of just anything in general. For instance, I'll give you an example. So with the housing project, the Hope 6 program that Henry Cisneros, another San Antonio person who was ahead of HUD during Bill Clinton's tenure as president, their whole deal was they wanted to get rid of concentrated poverty. So their whole approach was to tear down the housing projects and make mixed income communities. And by that, they're not really subsidizing like public housing anymore. They don't really care about the public good of the use value of housing folks. They just want basically to make money and to just basically give like an alley-oop to developers and to make it happen on the free market. And so now everything is getting rolled back. It's kind of like a reaction from, well, I'll take you back to the 80s with Reaganomics. So Reagan pretty much came in, and Margaret Thatcher in England. And so they wanted to just basically roll back the state. They believe that private sector does better than government, and allocating resources and tending to people's needs. And in theory, it sounds cool, but in practice, it's not at all. I mean, if you don't have money, then you're not going to get anything under neoliberalism. If everything is a market and you have no money, then you can't participate. And so, that's neoliberalism. And now CAB is a national asset builders, Latino asset builders. It's kind of a development nonprofit organization of Latino asset builders. They do like a lot of affordable housing and stuff like that. And so, yeah, they were given grant money for the Promise Zone, and they pretty much ran off with a lot of the money. There's a lot of organizations here on the East Side that ran off with a lot of the money, unfortunately. And so that's kind of what inspired me to actually try to, change that, especially because the Promise Zone designation here in the East Side is for 10 years. And so with COVID wiping off the little gain that the East Side has gotten, it's really important that, when we rebuild after, the COVID pandemic, it's really essential that we have bottom up leadership that, with the political consciousness and the actual will to act, not just going with the flow. Like a lot of these folks, they just want to go along to get along at this point. They're older, and I'm not trying to, pick on the older Black boomers and, the older Latino boomers in San Antonio, but they just, at this point, they're comfortable. At this point, they just lack the fire and they lack the will to really act, But it's important though, that, we still respect our elders. I still respect my elders, and, I still, look for them for wisdom, and especially like exactly what not to do, because in this kind of like development and community organizing space, they did a lot of stuff that wasn't really good for the community, and they pretty much just looked out for themselves. So yeah, I see a question. Yeah, you can go ahead and say that out loud.
Thank you, Alexander. So there's a question that is specifically about the relationship between wages and poverty. And so if you could give us a little bit more information about that relationship, how are the wages specifically for African American households in San Antonio affected by structural inequality? And also another comment from JS in regards to the grants that are being made available for development projects. JS asks, are these grants being audited, and has there been any complaints to the Inspector General? Second question is, are they meeting all the criteria outlined in their grant proposal? And JS also had asked previously about the relationship between wages and household income, if you can respond to those.
Thank you for that question. As far as the grants, that's kind of what I'm pushing for, is to actually look at, if there was a misappropriation, if there was some funny business like on paper that we can actually prove. Because being in the community, I've spoken with plenty of people that were a part, like residents that were actually like a part of the programs that had came in, and they all got burned at the end of them. People know what happened, why like the My Brother's Keeper stuff went down and got sent to a whole nother organization. Some other things about money and why certain things didn't go as planned. It's really just behind the scenes talk, because a lot of people are scared to actually come out and say who did what, why, when, where. And so I'm trying to change that. Again, like there's a certain lack of leadership in that aspect. I feel as if like two people, again, they just don't have the will to do it. They know it went bad, and they're just like, okay, like, that's fine or whatever. I just won't deal with those people. I won't deal with these other people. And it's not an actual like investigation. And I really want to start interviewing the people that were a part of like the Choice neighborhood stuff, that, the residents that were supposedly stakeholders and everything, and actually get the information and do an investigative report on that. Because again, most of it is just talks, at the local bar or just on the block of like, of, you know, when we're talking about, man, like, why is the East Side poor? We walk all this money. And I'm like, well, let me tell you what happened when I was trying to, you know, trying to help out with the Promise Zone. And so I want them, I'm trying to make the space for them to come forward, honestly. And let's make it plain. And let's name names and let's investigate. Um, because again, like, there's a lot of money that came to the East Side, and there's a lot of people that put their name on certain things, and they're gone. Like that Mike dude, he's gone. You know what I'm saying? He has a whole job in Victoria, Texas, or something, doing some Hakeem Brown. Yeah, I'm naming names. It's fine, whatever. A lot of them, they came. You know, they got in where they fit in when the money was all divvied up, and DeMonte too, whatever, and they dipped out. You know what I'm saying? And that's my issue. They use the East Side, they use that whole situation as a resume booster, and it'd be the only token Negro that the city of San Antonio can use. They come here, they use and abuse Black people too. Black people do it too. They came in and exploited folks. Brian Dillard too. He came in and helped gentrify his neighborhood. Now he has a whole nice, cushy job at the city of San Antonio. You know, the digital divide in San Antonio is still messed up. When COVID happened, initially with the schools, they didn't have like Wi-Fi. You know, they didn't even have like hotspots for the kids for remote learning. And it's like, bro, like you from here, you did all this work supposed in the community. You can't even get no hotspots for no kids in your neighborhood, and you making all this money. Again, these people use that situation to pad their resume, to make it seem like, you know, and I'll keep it real. I don't speak for all Black people. I speak for myself and like-minded individuals that understand where I'm coming from and feel the same way as I do. And so there's a finesse that certain folks do. They'll come and they'll, you know, slap a couple of hands, you know, get some pictures, you know, kiss a couple of babies, and then they'll act like they're the conduit and they act like they speak for the whole community. And so they'll use that to get themselves a job and to leverage that to, you know, build their own brand as like, hey, I'm the Black person here. So, you know, if you bring a grant or you bring some money, or if you know, there's something that happens in the city, or if you need like a token board, if you need a token on a board position or advisory board or some kind of commission or something, call me. That's pretty much what it's turned out to be. It's a job program from other people, and it's basically them just, you know, on a come up and, you know, finessing the situation. And I mean, San Antonio is just, it's always been a low wage city, unfortunately. I worked in the community economic development department in the county. And unfortunately, like they give a lot of incentives to a lot of big companies, knowing that we don't have like the skilled labor or like the educational attainment to even, you know, to fill those jobs. So unfortunately, they use a lot of, you know, tax-paying, low-wage citizens, you know, money to basically give to big corporations that are not going to hire them in the first place, that they're going to try to, you know, do all the downtown development and everything that they're trying to do and pull more, you know, educated folks from Austin or San Francisco, et cetera, and basically use the people's money that's been living here, struggling, and, you know, economic segregation and intergenerational poverty for years. They're going to use that to subsidize, you know, developers that's going to push them out, and a whole new other group of people that, you know, is going to take those jobs. Those jobs aren't necessary for the people. Yeah, you can go ahead and chime in. Sorry.
Hey, thank you so much, Alexander. I just wanted to kind of chime in and also share some of the questions that have been posed and some of the comments in the chat box. First of all, I think like I want to just share as a peer that learning how to apply for grants, learning how to make project proposals, learning how to pitch those proposals, learning how to manage those monies, how to manage those people, and how to run things according to a timeline. All of those are skill sets that are very, very much needed in a lot of different professions, including in development, community development, housing development, etc. And so just kind of responding to someone's question about JS to everyone. Again, are these grants being audited, and has there been any complaints to the Inspector General? Are they meeting all the criteria outlined in their grant proposal? Something that I've seen as somebody that is working on a grassroots level, similar to Alexander, not at the same level, but similar, is that there's this assumption that is held by people in positions of power, and specifically people with authority to exercise their power, such as those who work within the municipal government of the city of San Antonio. There's this assumption that if I do my job right, I do my job correctly, then I'm doing a good job. And I don't think that we should assume that because you know how to work within the system, maybe you know how to work really well within the system, maybe you know how to design and implement your own initiatives within the system. Those are all wonderful skills to have. And those are all wonderful skills to have, especially if you are a person that is Black, Indigenous, of color, migrant, first generation, working class, because those are survival skills. But knowing how to work within the system doesn't necessarily make you a leader. It doesn't necessarily mean that you know what people want based on lived experience. There's a difference between being book smart and being street smart, and knowing how to operate programs, write grants, and manage those funds is not necessarily an indicator of any of the other questions that folks on the margins or who are working on a grassroots level are trying to ask themselves or hold themselves accountable to. So there's different styles of leadership. And I think that while we have these safeguards that are about inspections, meeting criterias, they're not necessarily the criteria of the people that work outside of those systems. And they usually don't include the actual visions of those people that are outside of those systems, who are the people that are supposedly the ones who are being centered, who are being served. So I would say that is a response to this assumption that we have, you know, are we meeting criteria? Whose criteria? Who designs that criteria? Who informs it? Is there community input? Who's making the decisions? Lots of questions about those processes. I just want to come back to Carrie Roberts' questions. I think it's really important because we can critique, yes, forever and ever critique, but it's also important to learn about what is working outside of our context, if there are any models that are working outside of our context. And I want to share that usually the best models of how to approach any of these decisions that are about affecting people's lives, that the people who are going to be affected should be the ones that are engaged, should be the ones that are kind of designing that, guiding, if you will, the people that have those technical skills to make sure that those grants, those proposals, and that management happens accordingly to meet those objectives. So Carrie Roberts' question is, what does your comparative analysis show in relation to other urban, local, city governments in neighboring communities? And the second question is, what are they doing right? What are their best practices? And I'll let you respond to that, Alexander.
Give you 1 second. I kind of hit something on accident.
And I'll just read the question again. What does your comparative analysis show in relation to other urban, local, city governments in neighboring communities? And 2, what are they doing right in terms of best practices?
Okay, so comparatively speaking, I looked at all the, the neighborhoods that the promise zones. San Antonio wasn't the only one. There was one in Los Angeles, Philadelphia, I think Louisville, Kentucky, and some other places. Um, and pretty much the same thing happened. In LA, there's a lot of gentrification. Same thing in Louisville. Same thing as far as in Philly. So pretty much like the programs over there, they didn't work as well. They actually kind of hurt the population that was already there. And so I think some of the best practices that I have seen are definitely cities that have started like incorporating community land trusts. And a good program also that I've seen in Philly that I would love to like model here in San Antonio is a program called Jumpstart. Basically, they sit down and teach the residents of the residents of the area basically real estate development skills. And so I would love to incorporate that here on a grassroots level and also like an urban planning, discussion teaching as well, so that when, the city or, developers come to the East Side or come to like, the neighborhood associations, the people actually can understand what they're saying and how it's going to affect them. You know what I mean? And to see like, this development isn't really going to help us. Or hey, when they say, oh, we'll get tax credits for like 10% of affordable housing, what that truly means, affordable to who? How much is it going to be like as far as like rent wise, and who's going to be able to be there and for how long? And so cities that I've seen that have incorporated, stuff like that, like raising the political consciousness and raising like, the actual like tangible skills of the people, because I've seen as an urban planner that when certain planning meetings are there, they'll try to give them the textbook definition of certain words and phrases of the plans, but it really goes over a lot of people's heads that actually attend the meetings, unfortunately. They think certain developments are certain plans when they see like a nice picture, like rendering of this new development. Unfortunately, they think that like, oh, we're all gonna live here. And if you look at the fine print, like they'll let you know that, nah, like, it's a mixed income development. This is how many units are gonna be affordable and for how long. They never really go to the nitty gritty of it. And they never tell them how like with this new development in this poor area, there's gonna be real estate speculation. We're already speculating because we heard the city was gonna give developer incentives, or they're trying to spend this money because of the plan, like with the urban planning, they'll come with a comprehensive plan. And so developers and, small time, real estate investors, they'll read that and they'll already start, flipping houses or buying properties, and, that real estate speculation comes. And before you know it, the people there will come and they'll see like, oh, my rent is up and like my property taxes up. What's going on? And so they're never told the full story, the full ramifications of decisions. Like every decision has consequences, especially with development and everything like that. So they're never told like, the bigger picture of like what's gonna happen. And I've seen that a lot. And from like grassroots organizing, from like urban planners on like the grassroots level, like in New York, I've seen them, incorporate some kind of more progressive urban planning, like teaching. And I would love to do that here, start a program like that. Sorry, I'm looking at the questions in the chat.
I can go ahead and read them out loud. We have a comment and a question from Jake and Rachel. You can hop on and ask yourself if you would like to, or I'll continue reading. I don't like to speak for people, but It's Friday. I know some people don't want to be seen or heard. That's okay. So Jake and Rachel, thank you so much. Say it's hard. It's kind of hard to remember now, but last year the political hot topic in Texas was property taxes. Much noise was made that reducing property taxes would aid poor residents and stem gentrification, but I viewed it as a disingenuous effort to reallocate wealth from the bottom to the top. Would love to hear Alexander's thoughts on what he heard from residents of the East Side during that time and what his thoughts were regarding politics surrounding the property tax discussion.
Absolutely, that's a good question. So I actually did a little block walking to help, folks in Denver Heights, especially try to, apply for their homestead exemption. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't even know about the homestead exemption. And so people were paying, their property tax, like high property taxes for a long time and getting squeezed without, knowing they can get an exemption. And actually did get to sit down with the county tax appraiser, Mike, when he was there. And we spoke about the property tax issues. And you're right, it is kind of a wealth redistribution from top to bottom. From bottom to the top, excuse me. And so people in the neighborhood were just basically like, they own their homes for a long time. They've been in the community for a long time, back when there was disinvestment, when nobody wanted anything to do with the East Side, you know what I mean? They were still proud homeowners. They still sent their kids to the schools out here. They still, lived here and everything and raised families here. But the rise in property tax has really squeezed them real bad. And again, a lot of people didn't even know about the exemption. And even then, like with the low wages, some of when you finally lock in your exemption, it's still kind of, if you're already poor to begin with, and you're already, living hand to mouth, property taxes, especially in Denver Heights and in San Antonio, is too much for most people. And I'm trying to see the last question.
Yeah, so Jason Anderson is kind of just sharing some observations about some of the language that is used when referring to residents. So Jason Anderson says, if you know how to listen for it, they tell on themselves. During the Housing Council meeting, the Saha CEO was talking about his residents as, quote, customers, end quote, and lauding around the amount of private-public partnership they were achieving in some new developments. So I think hearing residents being referred to as customers is a very particular way of identifying your relationship, right, as a service provider to the folks that are receiving the service. So that language is a way to tell how are we in relation to each other. And so I asked Jason, well, how would you prefer to be in relationship to development corporations? What would this look like? How would you refer to each other? And I think that questioning of how are we in relationship to each other is key, because again, I think folks that work in the profit industrial complex or within the municipal government, or I think any person, right, that comes with this authority, sometimes entitlement, assumption about I know more than you because of my credentials or my professional experience. And so how do we begin to break down this assumption that some people know more than others because they've read about it versus experienced it? And how do we get those voices in the room and get the officials to see that we're in conversation with each other, not some being served and some being the servers, if that makes any kind of sense. So just kind of sharing Jason's thoughts on that. Jason says, well, I would prefer the relationship to be, I would want the people living in the area to be the development authority, this would look something like maybe state owned and not privately sold off and mismanaged, or a housing co-op. So Jason is offering a different way of engaging engagement between residents and development authorities, where it's something that's kind of co-shared or co-owned, solely owned and managed by residents. Carrie Roberts says customers versus constituents, big difference in deliverables slash services. So these are some of the comments, and please feel free to unmute yourself and just chime in.
Yeah, does anyone have a question for me?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead, Ms. Deborah Hampton. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'm from Tacoma, Washington, and we deal with some of the same issues here that you're dealing with in Texas. And my question is on the statement between the baby boomers and the upcoming leadership that is trying to be established. How do you break that barrier? Because as he was saying, that he needs the wisdom of those people that have went before him, but how do we instill the upcoming leadership that they do need that wisdom, instead of setting that generation aside? Because it seems like that baby boomer generation, I can't remember the generation that comes behind them, it's kind of like everybody, even in the church, is skipping over that generation and going to the millennials. And then you have some of the millennials that you can't teach them anything. They know everything, and they're not going to seek the people who have walked before them. So how do you break that gap where everybody is working in one unified effort to accomplish the things that we need, not only in Tacoma, but in Texas?
All right, that was a good question. And for y'all that don't know, that's my aunt. That's my aunt Debbie. Hello. And so I would say, first off, I didn't want to dunk on the baby boomers. That's not what I was trying to do. But I will say this: all the complaints that boomers have for us millennials is like, you raised us. Again, like, you judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. So, your complaints about, I'm just speaking in general, like boomer complaints about millennials. It's like, you were the ones that birthed us and raised us. You are the ones that created all the institutions, or, maintained them, or ran your households a certain way. And so my thing is, there should have been that pipeline already in place. There should have already been that knowledge, secured and passed down to us. And so, when certain, elders in the community talk about, how can we, bridge the gap, or how can we do that? I want to ask you the same question. Like, you were kind of the one steering the ship for a long time, That's not really on us millennials to fix that problem. You know what I'm saying? We have to come up with our own solutions at this point. But I mean, mostly for boomers, it should be, wisdom and material support. I mean, if you look in the Black community, the boomers hold most of the wealth. And so if boomers want to bridge the divide, like the phrase said, open up your purse. You should really just start investing in, us millennials more, because, if you look at the data, we don't really have a lot of wealth. We have precarious working conditions and everything. And so I think at this point, how to bridge, the gap on millennials and boomers is for boomers to really, open up that wallet, open up that purse, and really start, investing in, younger generation, especially like mentorships and, funding organizations.
Okay, the second part of my question is because when you have baby boomers, so that means that you have babies raising babies, and there was a big boom within that. So you got parents that are in relationship with their children, and I'm saying generally, but in relationship with their children where they're the friends and not the parents. And then when you talked about the economic unrest in the black neighborhood on the low income jobs that they have, so they're working 2 or 3 jobs, so they don't have money. They're working 2 or 3 jobs to stay afloat. And so then when you statistically look at baby boomers, they stay at jobs, between 2 to 3 years before they go to the next job. So they're constantly moving. And so when you have those two dynamics in play, somebody's got to, and I agree, somebody's got to stop and do a unifying effort to bring those two efforts together. Because first of all, the baby boomers have the money, the millennials don't. And so we're not going to give you money if every 2 or 3 years you're moving from one place to another. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's my question. How do you, because there's wrong, or I don't know, injustices on both sides, because you can't blame the parent that has to work to provide for the child. And then you can't blame the child being raised in that environment when their parents have done the best that they can. And so now, how do you stop the parents, so to speak, and to have to work 3 or 4 jobs, and stop the baby boomers from moving to 2 or 3 jobs at the same time, where they could sit at the table and make conversations to overcome those barriers?
Give me 1 second. You kind of went out in and out a couple of times. I'm trying to like kind of. Can you like type what your question was, and Debbie? Kind of like went in and out. Sorry about that.
Did the facilitator hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And if you want to give like a brief summary, I can type it up for you while you just.
Okay, so basically what I'm saying is, because we're at a precipice, you have the baby boomers who have to work generally 2 or 3 jobs just to stay afloat, to pay rent, food, and other things that they do. Then you have the baby boomers who statistically they don't stay at jobs no longer than 2 or 3 years before they're moving to the next job. So you have all this movement going on. So how do you break the movement of the parents having to work 2 or 3 jobs to keep afloat, and then you have the millennials who are moving. Statistically, they don't stay in a job no longer than 2 to 3 years. So you have all this movement coming on that's going on between the two, that we can stop it where if you want the baby boomers to pass the money on to the kids, it's kind of like the millennials need to show that they're able to take care of the inheritance that's being passed on to them, and not just taking the money and moving every 2 to 3 years, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the economy is different than, what it was when the boomers were younger. I mean, there was a time where you could literally just graduate from high school, go to the manufacturing tire plant up the street from you, and literally, raise a family of 4 on like one income on manufacturing. And those days are over, especially for us millennials and, Gen Z. Like, we move a lot. We change jobs a lot because it's the gig economy. There's a lot of jobs now that have no benefits. As a boomer, you could stay at a job for a long time, get health care, get dental, get all kinds of stuff. But nowadays, again, the economy is way different. Even before COVID, and now with COVID coming, there's going to be a lot of migration. There's going to be a lot of stuff, and again, the boomers had unions. You know, a lot of people were unionized. There was a more robust public sector. When we grew up, you know, as kids in the 90s, you know, that was on, you know, the hills of neoliberalism and rolling back the state and rolling back, you know, public benefits, rolling back unions. And so we, you know, we didn't have the, you know, the privilege, I don't even want to say privilege, we didn't have the opportunity to really work at one set job with a living wage, you know, with, and, you know, inflation low, you know, rent is low, you know, healthcare wasn't that expensive at the time. College was relatively cheap at the time. When we got older, like everything was already expensive and jobs. And after '08, you know, after the Great Recession, a lot of stuff got wiped out. And even the boomers, a lot of boomers, especially Black boomers, got wiped out. A lot of their retirements, a lot of their savings got wiped out. So that's also like a wealth disparity conversation, because there's still a lot of boomers that do have to work like 2 to 3 jobs into retirement. They're not going to have a decent retirement because of, you know, structural racism and how the economy is now. And so breaking the movement of parents having to work 2 or 3 jobs and moving every 2, 3 years, I mean, that's a structural conversation, like, for the United States. The economy, again, is way different. You know, less unionized work, you know, manufacturing base is pretty much gone. You have tech, you have low wage, you know, service jobs. Our economy is basically, you know, I think like 60% of it is consumption based. And so people are, you know, we're not manufacturing anything. We're just, you know, low wage service sector jobs. And, you know, again, especially with COVID now, like you had to, you know, right now you might have to pick up a job, you know, doing DoorDash and doing, you know, stuff, doing 2, 3 different things. And, you know, having like a Shopify account on, you know what I'm saying, online, having an online business. You gotta really make it happen now. Like you gotta go where the jobs are at. So if they're hiring in Austin, if they're hiring, like, especially for like, you know, Black people, like a millennial, me growing up as a millennial, I always heard like, bro, graduate from college, leave San Antonio, go to Houston, go to Dallas, go to Atlanta. That's where Black people are doing good at. You know what I'm saying? And so you go where the jobs are at. And unfortunately, we're very transient.
Hi, Alexander. As an educator, and I teach in the Judson ISD school, and I am at a Title I school. One of the things that I feel that is important is education. It's not necessarily that you have to go to college, but a lot of our students of color, where I'm at in the Title I school that I am, education is very important. And sometimes I feel that that's not important at the particular school that I'm at to the children and the parents of color. I'm not saying it's everyone, but I'm saying it's a majority. So we have to educate our students. If I take a poll, I usually average 23 children. If I take a poll and say, how many of you have sister or brother that has graduated from high school? I may have 3 hands that go up. How many of you know someone that's in jail? They'll raise their hand. It's usually their mother or their father. When I'll say, how many of you have a brother or sister that graduated from college? I'll say, how many of you am I the first Black person or person of color that has been your teacher? And they raise their hand, except for maybe 1 or 2. So we have to push our younger generation to go out and to get in those jobs where we can educate our own. It's amazing the things that you think that we should know that we don't know, even about our own culture. So it again begins with the education from the parent. I mean, it takes a village to raise children. It really does. And so for the things that we know, they don't know. that we're behind in the reading, we're
Okay.
behind in the writing, we're behind in the math. And the attitude, I'm just speaking to the school that I'm at, not only from the children, but the parent. Teach them if you can. You mean you don't discipline them at school? Well, what do you want me to do? I can't do nothing about it if you can't handle it. We have got to educate. We have got to educate our young, and we have to model, because they're watching and they're looking at everything, whether it's the parent, the brother, the sister, the whoever. They're watching and they're emulating, and we have to be good role models for them so that they can grow and know about the things of the world that's going to impact them. When I tell them you can't even get a job at McDonald's not unless you have a high school education, they're shocked. So it begins with the education. Through the education, whether it's through, a high school, college, or just everyday living, we have got to teach them about these things.
I agree. That's my mother, everybody, for those who don't know. That's my mom's. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, some folks didn't have my home life growing up. You know what I mean? When I got home from school, the first thing my mom would tell me is, "Hey, you got any homework? Come sit down and come do your homework." Like, I couldn't go outside. I had to show her my homework. I had to show her my planner. If I got in trouble, she was gonna, go to the parent. She went to every parent teacher meeting. You know what I'm saying? If I got in trouble, she would send my dad from work to come get, not everybody has that home life, unfortunately. And that is an issue. And so, and especially like in school, there's only so much a teacher can possibly do the 8 hours that you have with your students. The best course of action that we can do, again, like you said, Mom, is, it takes a village. And so that's going to take me and, other people to, create a program or something that we can, help the kids out with their homework, especially now that with COVID and the digital divide, unfortunately, a lot of these kids do not have, again, the home life for remote learning. Like, some of their parents can't help them with their homework. Some of the parents don't want to help them with their homework. And so we just gotta create some kind of programs and really step up. And again, like I was saying, as far as, leadership and learning, unlearning and learning about leadership, it's really, lifting up people and empowering people. And, and so with that being said, we just really have to put our heads together and think, irrespective of somebody's home life, how can we kind of step in and be, that village, make a conducive environment for them that we can kind of supplement what they're lacking in their home life. You know what I mean? We can't all just go in somebody's home and tell them, what to do. And we can't it sucks, but all we can do is really just try to make an environment and set up a program that we can help these kids out. Outside of school, outside of public education. Did you have a question, Shante, at all? I know you made a statement. I was trying to get to it.
Yeah, it was pretty lengthy because I was just thinking as y'all were talking. So I'm sorry. I just have a tendency to just go. But we were having a conversation. Y'all were having a conversation about generational differences, yeah. And particularly when it comes down to economic progress. Sometimes I worry that we get distracted by generational differences. And I think that's a construction and an obstruction to really thinking about ways to move forward economically, especially when you look at the disparities between racial groups, for instance. So I mentioned when generational identity and race intersect, the disparities look the same. So Generation Z Black students or Black people in Generation Z, white people, still massive disparities in terms of opportunities and abilities to navigate economic systems. Baby boomers, Black baby boomers, white baby boomers, same thing, massive, you know. So I think there are ways that we can look at generational differences and recognize, you know, that's a part of the lesson of history, right? Like things change over time, and so we have different perspectives. But I think sometimes we fixate on the differences between the generations to the detriment of our ability to make progress. And so, you know, I'm just wondering where we are in our thinking about the possibility of bringing in. I'm definitely not trying to sound like right wing. You know, let's not look at our differences. I think differences matter, right? And I think it's important to acknowledge differences. But I do think that there are ways that certain pieces in pieces of information are introduced to certain conversations with the intention of obstructing the conversation and creating something else, like a dangling carrot over here, look over here, or something else is happening, you know, that distraction. Because we might be different in terms of our perspectives, but so I'm a Generation Y, I think, Gen Y. You're a millennial. We've got baby boomers. But I promise you, when we're Black and when we're brown, that don't matter. Our struggles economically tend to look the same decade after decade after decade. And so then what, right? Because it's not that you know how to use a computer and I don't, that the jobs are available and the jobs aren't. There's a way that these systems kind of keep us locked out. And we have to start figuring out the ways to unlock and knock down and disrupt these systems on other levels beyond looking within and destroying, you know, kind of battling generational differences.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
No, that's good. And I mean, my point of, again, critiquing some of the baby boomers is that a lot of them, and because we have to look at our, you know, intraracial differences and issues before we can make a united front to, you know, take on the stuff from the outside. What I meant with baby boomers and how they have most of the wealth in the Black community is that, you know, we want to, you know, us as young people, we're more progressive. And so with them having, you know, a little bit more money than us, you know what I'm saying? They're more conservative and they're more comfortable. They don't really want to buck the system. They don't really want to, and I don't want to say all of them, but what I'm saying is there's a decent amount of baby boomers that when I'm just like, you know, sometimes you have to do direct action and protest. They're over there clutching their pearls. Like, you know what I'm saying? Why are they over there looting and all that? And that's not how you do it and all that. Again, they're in the suburbs, two-story house. They're retired military, they're retired teachers or something. And so they're kind of away from like the struggle of, you know, millennial, you know, Black people and, you know, Black people in the inner city that are trying to, you know, fight these issues. They're a little bit more comfortable. They're a little bit more, I'll say it, they're a little bit more compromised by the system. You know what I mean? And so when you're older, you know, you're retired, you got a little paper in your pocket, like everything is not so serious. You know what I mean? And so they're coming from like a weird vantage point when I'm just like, hey, they're not hiring, they're not doing this, and you know, I'm having a job issue. They're like, well, why don't you just go down there and pull your pants up and shake their hands and, you know, just stiffen up your resume and you'll get you a job. Like, you know what I'm saying? They're operating from a whole different playbook. They're operating from a whole different mindset. And so, especially when, you know, a couple of dollars in your pocket changes people. I don't care who you are. You know what I'm saying? Again, there's an issue with us being younger and more progressive and more with the will to act and like, nah, you know, we're going to push for reparations. We're going to push for this. We need a part of the economic, you know, pie and everything. If you talk to a certain older Black man, he's gonna be like, man, that sounds like a handout. Why don't you work hard? Like, that's excuses. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, there's COVID and, you know, all these people are dying and, you know, jobs aren't hiring and all that. And why don't you go, you know, cut some grass and shine some shoes? Like, they're operating from a whole different mindset.
Yes, but I think both I'm not trying to like take over the conversation, but But I think the mindset is still rooted in, it's symptomatic of oppression, right? Because you're revolutionary. Recognize that those middle-class baby boomers, right, who live in predominantly white neighborhoods, the idea of home acquisition in a predominantly white neighborhood was a radical concept for them, as radical as protesting and marching. That was risky behavior. You have no support for your family in this suburban neighborhood. You don't know who your kids gonna play with. You don't know what your kids are gonna learn in these schools about themselves. Radical behavior. And what I'm saying is, I think it works to identify the difference, definitely. But I think there's also a way that sometimes we forget that we're fighting the same oppressive system, and we get bogged down in conversations about the ways that we're experiencing oppression. And it's a different version of oppression Olympics. I get it. Talk respectability politics, and a 50-year-old and a 20-year-old see it very differently, right? I get it. But at the same time, the idea of respectability politics emerged as a consequence, a symptom of racism, right? So then what do we privilege in the conversation? Do we privilege the generational debate, or do we privilege the anti-oppression debate and start to try to work through establishing moments of empathy and compassion for cross-generational difference? Because again, what's radical to you today is going to be very different than what's radical to somebody 10 years from now. That's just the nature of it, right? So that's the part. But I honor the conversation. I really do. I'm in a place of trying to figure out, how do we bring it all together without this false sense of unity? Because this idea that all Black people have to see things the same way is a dehumanization concept. So, members of SNCC didn't see Martin Luther King as revolutionary at all. So, you know what I'm saying? So, but I'm just in that space right now. But I'm loving this conversation, as you can feel that energy that I'm giving.
Absolutely.
Shantae, I agree with you what you're saying, because everything that's radical, because when I talk to my parents, and so but the same systematic issue is still there. And I think too, we got to change our way of thinking with the times and be forward thinking. This generation, this world is going to more computers. We got to get our young people up on computers, not handheld games, but moving with what is going on in the world. And so we got to move forward. We got to move forward with that math, with that science. We got to look at, when you are going to college, you got to look at what's going on in the world. Well, yeah, you may want to be a basket weaver, but if there's no job out there for you, then that should be a sideline fun thing to do, because what are you going to contribute to the world? So you have to look at what's going on around you in the world, where you plan on living at. You always know you always going to need medical people. You're always going to need human resource people. You're always going to need urban planner people. So we need to start pushing our kids and opening up their horizon and look at all these other things that are out there, that you are more productive to the world instead of being a basketball. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with it. Okay. But instead of always being a basketball player, or you want to be a rapper, or you want to be a singer, there's bigger and better things out there for us. And we need to open up our eyes and get our children to start focusing on those type of things. That helps the world, helps our people, helps the economy.
But to your son's point, you know what young people come up with? Those jobs that we can't even imagine, that are going to always be needed, right? And that's where the entrepreneurial opportunities are too.
Yes, so there's a lot, and we just got to open up our eyes and get people exposed to this. Yes, you can do this. Like this girl told me she was going to be a chicken something. She looks at chickens and how they form their eggs and all of that. I never even thought of a job like that. Buku money. So we got to open up our eyes to what's going on in the world, where the world is going, and get our children interested in those type of things.
Absolutely. So let me go back to my experience with, and again, I'm not trying to dunk on the baby boomers. It's just conversations that I've had with a lot of different, Black baby boomers. And again, it's been kind of, I mean, they still have the reins of power in the Black community, especially within like the Democratic Party, you know what I mean? And the churches and businesses, etc. And again, my thing is, I don't, it's not pragmatic, it's not realistic to want Black, unity. We're all not gonna unite, you know what I'm saying? Do I believe in unity? Absolutely, you know what I'm saying? But I don't believe in uniformity. If we have, the same kind of outcome, like, if there's a conservative Black person, and if there's like a liberal Black person, if there's like a more radical, left-wing Black person, but we still want, Black people to have, self-determination and freedom and a good quality of life and be able to have a nice house over their head, food when they're hungry, and to be able to, get, medical attention, pay for it or whatever when they're sick, then we have different ways of getting about it. And of course, like, there's no one way to do something. There's different avenues to do that. My thing with, with some of the boomers is that when we offer them an alternative, some of them, not all of them, of course, when we would offer them a different perspective or a different alternative, they just wasn't going for it at all. And again, I would have wished that they would have, did a better job of, creating an environment for us that we could thrive, irrespective of, systematic racism, at least if they would leave us something. Because again, with Gen Z, to your point, and with, the disparities and everything, what a lot of Black people don't understand, like a lot of your millennial white friends, like they're cool. They're on their, Black Lives Matter stuff out there in Portland, wild and everything. But they don't realize when white baby boomers die, it's going to be trillions and trillions of dollars of a wealth transfer from their family, their moms and dads, dying, all the property and all their business assets, everything. And watch how fast they're not going to be too radical anymore. They're going to be well conservative. Oh, Negro Black Lives, oh, that was, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You know what I'm saying? And so, and with the boomers, I'm just like, hey, like, you're doing good, some of you, but we're out here like not doing good at all. So let's, get together and figure out, like, before you pass, like, help us, alley-oop, help this alley-oop so we can slam dunk it before you go out. You know what I'm saying? Like, you still have a lot of clout within the Democratic Party. You still have certain clout with the Black churches, because when the boomers die off, the Black church is gonna disappear. You know what I'm saying? I know that's a hot take. But I'm telling you, when the boomers go, church is gonna belly up. The Black churches, even with the civil rights, like, look at Black Lives Matter and there are other groups. They don't go through the Black church no more. There's no radical, there's no organizing in the church no more. So when the boomers die, there's gonna be a lot of stuff that's gonna die with it in the Black community. And so I'm just like, hey, before y'all die, help us out, because when these, white boomers die and they leave all their money to their white kids, oh, we're screwed. There's no way we're gonna catch up. You see what I'm saying? And so while boomers still have some clout, still have some power, still have some say, so it's like, hey, look at this perspective, because even then there's a stat that I've seen for Black, college educated millennials that were born in, like, middle class stuff. 9 out of 10 of them have reverted to, low class. Like, they've gone down a class. They're not middle class anymore. You see what I'm saying? That's a social fallout. That's systematic failure. And what I'm saying is, you want your kids to do better than what you did. And I know, the boomers, I know in their heart they mean well, but it's like, if you do what you always done, you get what you always got. Obviously, what y'all been doing for a while is not working. Look at the, the fruits of look at most of the Black communities. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not blaming them for leaving. Like, you had to do what you had to do. Like, there was systematic fallout. You know what I'm saying? It was a lot of racism.
You see what he's talking about?
What? Oh, that's my mom. But anyways, like.
Okay, so that goes back to my question. Okay, so you stated that. So let me ask the question another way. So how can you, in your generation, communicate with the boomers where they understand that wealth needs to be passed on?
Yeah, I mean, I've had several conversations with boomer business people, boomer politicians, boomer activists, and they just don't get it. A lot of them just don't get it, unfortunately. Of course, not all of them, but and again, like they're just set in their ways. And when it's time to act, and what I'm saying is like, think about like, for instance, like in some Black churches, the pastor is gonna preach until he falls out. And sometimes they don't even leave a successor. They just like, screw it. Like, I die. What you know, that story of Alexander the Great. When he was on his deathbed, everybody was like, so Alexander, who are you going to give the Macedonian Empire to? He said, to the strongest, and died. And so what I feel like a lot of the organization Black boomers are ahead of, they never have like a succession plan, and they never prepare you to, to build power or to like invest in you. And so it's just, they just never want to pass the baton until it's too late. And they never want to get you ready to even get to that point. You know what I'm saying? And they never want to just go out on a high horse. You know what I mean? It's okay to be like, all right, I've done my job, let me bow out at the top. It's like, nah, I'm gonna do it till I die. Like, I'm shot calling till I die, and whatever happens to the organization, whatever happens to whatever, that's on y'all. Y'all do what y'all do. You know what I mean? Or sometimes they'll die, they won't have a will, and like whoever, people fight over all the assets and stuff, and it's just like, there's really, with some boomers, there's really not like proper planning and proper grooming and a proper pipeline for the next generation, from my experience with that. And that's why I'm like, you know what? I'll be the change that I want to see. I want to put, younger people up on game that I had to learn the hard way. You know what I'm saying? And certain, boomers that I spoke to, like certain information that they got was really not good. It was really antiquated. There was no real vision. There was no, staying up to date on certain things and learning new ways of doing things. It was just one way. And if, you don't agree with that way, you're just, a lazy millennial and y'all don't know anything and whoop-de-wop, you know what I'm saying? And so, I don't know. I just feel like, certain, boom organizations just need to listen. Like, that's really all I can say. Like, I've had this discussion plenty of times, and other people I've had this discussion plenty of times, and I just feel like they just don't care at this point. It's like, well, I've done this for so long that I'm just gonna do it that way, and to hell with that new way. Like, I'm cool on that. Or to hell with your perspective. You're too young. Let me know when you get, they'll tell you like, hey, maybe you should do that. And then, they'll hit you with like, that little sly remark like, oh, I got shoes older than you, boy. Like, you know what I'm saying? And it's just like, they don't want to listen to no new information. And it just kind of sucks. But again, dialogue, honestly, just honest dialogue like we're having right now. Some people will tiptoe around the boomer question. They'll just be like, well, I'm not finna deal with them. Like, we're just gonna, like, for certain, Black activists, they're like, oh, those old boomers, they're conservative, oh, the Black church, we don't need them. They're antiquated, bro. We not on that. They're on some kumbaya stuff. Like, even on Twitter, I've seen them go in on John Lewis, saying that he was co-opted, he was a pet Negro, he done sold out, you know what I'm saying? And that's just what it is at this point. And I just feel like we just have to have hard, honest conversations and not just be shy enough to tell them like, hey, like, I feel some type of way about this. You know what I mean? Instead of like, people want to tiptoe because like, the respect thing and all that. They think any kind of critique or criticism is disrespect. You know what I mean? And so I don't know if anybody wants to add to that, or anybody has another question or concern or anything.
I have a question. This is your mom again. Sorry. If you look at the boomers are the ones that are running the United States. Look at the ages from your Congress down to your presidents, down to your Senate. You may start getting younger people down running the districts, or maybe the mayors.
Yeah.
So you got to look at the generation of people that you're dealing with, the people that are in control. So the young people need to start stepping up, start voting, start running for these positions to get the people to get in the mindset that you're thinking. Because as long as you have the older people thinking the way that they're thinking, it's always going to be a battle of the wills.
Yeah.
And the older people are the ones that are running the country. If you look all around the world, it's the older baby boomers that are running the world, that are making the decision. In order to make an impact, you guys have to get out there and start voting. You're going to have to start doing exactly what you're doing, having these grassroots meetings, having these serious conversations, and getting you young people out there to start running for these positions, for mayors and Congress and Senates, and step up the plate. If not, the older generation, as you said, they're going to hang on to their thoughts and beliefs.
No, I agree. And it goes to my point of the disconnect. Again, it's a boomer not throwing you under the bus, Mom, but it's a boomer saying, hey, y'all young people need to do this. But it wasn't like they groomed us to do that, to be a certain way. You see what I'm saying? Or to have that information, or to be able to just do it on our own, as far as like, you know, I took you to city council meetings, and like, you know, I taught you, you know, you read the Constitution, you know, they didn't really prepare us for that. It's just like, well, why are you complaining? Why don't you do this? And it's like, well, you didn't set up that environment for us to do that. Like, you're the people in charge. Like, if you want your kid to play baseball, you're gonna make them play baseball. If you want your kids to play sports, like, you know, there's so many parents, that force their kids to play sports. You know what I'm saying? Whether they like it or not. And their kids eventually like it, they get good at it. And so my thing is like, the boomers didn't do that. They didn't groom us for certain positions of power, or even gave us the mindset or certain information to do that. You know what I mean? And so that just shows to me, like, you know, a lack of leadership. Like, you kind of influence people and then you see them do their own thing. But if it's like for certain, like for, you know, like an example, like certain organizations, like boom organizations will be like, well, why we don't have any youth? And I'm just like, well, aren't y'all parents? You know, don't you pick up your kids from school? Didn't you, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're the ones in charge. Why can't you find no kids for your organization? Why do the kids have to come find you? Like, where's that engagement? Like, you're the adults, or you were the adults at the time, you know what I mean? Why are you complaining about the youth? You're acting like you can't find any youth. Why aren't you making an effort to find youth? And that's my thing. It's like, they never really set up an organization, or they never really set up a pipeline for that. I don't know if y'all understand what I'm saying. If you get what I'm trying to say.
In a way, I do. So my question is, the way that your parents raised you, how did you come in this position? Did they specifically raise you to be sitting here today, talking with us? Did your parents raise you that way?
Did my parents raise me this way?
Yes. Did they raise you to have this passion that you're having right now, to speak, to come on here and to share your thoughts? Did your parents raise you to be who you are today in this particular position?
You know that answer.
Because this is what I'm saying, because I think that's a lot of the fault. Because I believe you were raised a certain way, but I believe that whatever happened, whatever you experienced, or whatever you saw brought you to this position, to have this passion, to do what you're doing. So People have to have the passion to be able to go to Congress and want to be president or want to be the mayor. There's a passion. There's a need that they feel that they can fulfill that drives them. And so when you look at the kids, so I'm saying part of it is unnatural to feel that your parents are going to come to you and hand you money, hand you a purpose, hand you a desire, give you a roadmap, where to go, what to say, and what to do. So part of it is got to be the passion of wanting to make things better. When your mom talks about school, she has a passion to educate these kids. When she was growing up, she wasn't trained to be no teacher. That never even came in. Through her life experience, it became something that she desired to do. And I think this is what the young people are missing today, because you have to have a passion. What did God call you to do? What's your purpose on this earth? It is not to stand here and have everybody hand everything to you. You have to do you have to do the work. And so part of that work is, and this is what I tell, because we have conversations like this, and I speak with the young folks all the time. They criticize the previous generation because everybody in their generation thinks that they know what's going on. But we have not lived other people's generations. So this is why there's got to be some communication, because the overall need is still jobs, health care, child care, and money. If you go through all the generations, it's the same thing. If you just say through the Black generation or through the color people generation, it's still the same problem. So that's my question. We could talk about this all day long, but what is driving you to do what you do to come up with a solution? Because you can't disavow the previous generation or the generation coming behind you, because you're going to be the next generation, and somebody younger than you, maybe your son, is going to be sitting in your same chair, saying the same thing. And so that, to me, that's the issue. How do we solve those four things across the generation and prepare the next generation and the next generation and the next generation?
All right. So, I mean, my upbringing is not the norm, unfortunately. And so I'm just gonna have to do what, the baby boomers didn't do. And I'm not trying to dump on you. I'm just saying, like, some people don't have the home life, you know what I mean? And we have to be more communal as, community organizing. We have to be able to set up the environment, set up the, the programs and the organizations that, we can help, the next generation, know certain things and have a different perspective and try to, be the change in the world. But again, my upbringing is not the norm per se. And so again, it shows a lack of leadership on the boomers' part that,
You keep saying that, but when I'm talking, like, I'm trying to get your generation to vote. And
I didn't hear the last part.
I said, I'm trying to get your generation. I'm trying to come up with some pilot plan to get your generation to vote. When I go and talk to your generation, most of them, the ones that I'm talking to, they don't vote because they don't feel like it's going to do any good. And they're just sitting and waiting for the next big rapper or somebody to come along to fulfill their life. And they don't care. Some of them don't, and not like everybody has to have a college education, but some of them don't even care to go to college because they're sitting around waiting for their parents to die so they can get their money. These are the millennials that I'm dealing with. So they don't see the need. So there is a group of you that see the need, but there's also a group of you that don't see the need. And so you still got the same issue. So in their mindset, they just take whatever job they get. If they can do construction, if they work 1 day, 2 days, they're fine. So there's still got to be some communication because across the generation, it's still the same issues with the money, the jobs, the finances.
I didn't hear the last part.
So what I'm saying is it's still the same issues. How do we communicate across generations for the same thing that everybody is needing at this time? Money, jobs, a home, a purpose. So how do we get everybody on this one accord? Because basically we're repeating it. And so you guys feel like you guys have the answer right now, and you guys are willing to do the work. But to me, there's got to be some connectivity between the generation above you and the generation that's coming after you. Otherwise, somebody else is going to be sitting in your chair, and we're going to be having the same conversation over again. So that's my thing. How do we connect it? So it's really not. Everybody has their faults. It's just like, how do we come to the table and commune and with each other to really come up with something that is going to help everybody before us, behind us, in front of us. That's my question.
So
Can I say something really quickly? So I spent 13 years as a college professor of English in rhetoric and composition, right? So you know what the hardest thing to teach is effective argumentation. And everybody think they can argue naturally just because people raise their voices. But the rhetorics of argumentation require that you actually have to be interested in what's being said on both ends. You have to be interested. You have to believe in your ability to actually get the other person to understand your perspective. And so sometimes we get so caught up in the tool, the way that the route to communication, than in the message. So I think I sit in this space all the time, listening to people who really want to communicate fundamentally the same kind of concern, the same kind of issue. But instead of really being concerned about the issue, they're more concerned in how the message is delivered. Their energy is in protecting the ability to deliver a message a certain way versus getting the message across. So like if you wanted to get money from me, your objective is to get money from me. So what difference would it make if you have to speak to me calmly or if you have to yell and scream at me? But you should have an awareness of your audience so that you can get what you need. And I know it sounds really simple, but when passions enter purpose in the conversation, we sometimes lose sight of what we're trying to achieve. And I think this is what I'm saying about the generational divide issue. The conversations are so the same in terms of what people want to see happen, this idea of moving forward. But on both ends, often there's more dart throwing than listening and really wanting to honor that the experiences are different. And can we just leave that there and then move forward with where we're trying to go? And the tricky part about legacy, criticizing upward or criticizing backward to the past, you can't criticize all the bad and then not give it credit for your good. So I so love that Ms. Deborah asked the question, why are you the way you are, right? Or why are you who you are? Because generationally, you don't just inherit all the bad. That's not how inheritance works. You inherit the bad and you inherit the good. So I think sometimes it helps to kind of lead with, what's the good that we got from this generation as well, right? That's a part of argumentation and rhetoric too. But I'm sorry, I'm being a real teacher up in here, but or I'm diverting back to where I used to be. Maybe I miss teaching English, but it's hard, right? Because we're human, and I think that sometimes we do get caught up in the messaging more than the message. But yeah, from generation to generation, you don't just get the bad stuff. You can see the frustrations, yes, but there's a reason why you actually can wild out as Generation Z. It's because there is some fundamental stability that the baby boomers did was take a certain different kind of risk to give you the comfort to be able to comfort, to give, and I'm saying me too. I'm not a Generation Zer, I'm not a millennial, but I'm in that generation Y, but the generations that came before me are the reason why I can have certain kinds of relationships with people of other cultures, right? And so we got to honor that too. But I think that's what a lot of baby boomers are looking for in these conversations is, where do you honor me in the conversation? And you can criticize me all day, but if there's never any honoring, it's frustrating. And that is also absolutely true about Generation Zers. If you don't honor who I am as a person, I can't hear nothing you're saying. And so we just got to get to that point, I think, of honoring people, and then we can work toward achieving whatever the common end is. But I'm loving this conversation as a study of like argumentation and rhetoric. It really is like fascinating to me right now.
Okay, Professor. Can I call you Professor? Can I call you Professor?
Oh, sure. You can call me Shantae too.
So with all of your, and don't take this in a negative way, but
No.
with all of your education and your experience, and I take your point of looking at the good, how would you bring those generations together?
But I think it's just that, right? It's not my job to bring the generations together. I think person to person, my responsibility as a human being is to make sure that if I'm committed, I always check Shantae before I check anybody else. So we can have these conversations all day. I'm good with it. Because person to person, it's important for me. If I'm going to have the conversation with you about progress, I'm going to first acknowledge, real talk, do I care to listen to you? That's the first and foremost. I'm not going to feign interest. If I'm not interested in hearing you, then I won't have the conversation. But I think sometimes we're forced into conversations. And so then we end up battling more than we end up listening. And, it's an old adage, but God gave us 2 ears, 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. So, but I think we don't listen intentionally. We don't listen strategically. We don't across generations. That's a human issue. That's a across race, across generation. We want to be heard more than we want to hear other people often. And that's, to me, that creates a distraction in the argument. So for me, in terms of bringing generations together, generations come together. We're talking in mad generalities in this conversation, and I'm good with it. But there are lots of ways that generations come together, and there are lots of commonalities that people find across generations. I think for this particular moment, in this particular context, we're acknowledging where generational differences create huge gaps in progress, and that's important to acknowledge. But I also think that there are moments and spaces where the interests of various generations intersect almost naturally. So it's not as difficult. But I do think, it's important to be able to hear beyond the differences in talk. So I think I can echo, right? Like some generations don't like my mother's generation will completely discredit a beautiful argument because it's offered it's offered with the artistic linguistic artistry of slang. They'll just discredit it though, right? You sound a certain kind of way, I'm not listening to your argument. And then there are people who are younger who maybe engage that level of vernacular who will completely discredit a beautiful argument because it's offered in the context of church rhetoric and a Christian ethos. They'll completely dismiss it, even if it's a beautiful, realistic, poignant idea. But if you don't confront your own biases internally, and this is an issue in terms of equity for everybody, you got to hold yourself accountable first and foremost. But I just don't know that people are so ready to do that part. When we're really when we're ready to say like, listen, I recognize that I have to really be intentional about listening more to you, because when you come at me, I don't always want to listen. Have a conversation about race relations. The minute a white woman starts talking, I have to consciously listen. I'm honoring that. I'm being honest about that. I have to consciously listen to what this white woman want to say, because my instinct is to dismiss her. But I have to consciously listen. So I'm saying we all work in these conversations. But if we're not all working, if we're thinking every conversation is about just being heard, then we miss it. I'm off my soapbox, y'all. I'm sorry. I am drinking Cabernet, but that has nothing to do with it.
Hey. Yeah, right. So again, I'm not trying to dunk on the baby boomers. It was just my experience with, you know, organizing and having to deal with like a generational gap. Again, we have the same issues, you know, and again, I respect the baby boomers because, you know, certain people, like, you know, I didn't like how people were disrespecting John Lewis, how some people in my generation, they're like more radical to the left. I didn't really appreciate that. At the end of the day, he's still an ancestor. He still faced down white supremacy. He still got beat up for us. You know what I'm saying? He still was there when you could get killed for just being black. Like, you know what I mean? He still went through all that pain and suffering and struggle as a black man growing up in America and trying to fight back in the way that he thought was best that we should do it. So I still have respect for the boomers that went through Jim Crow, that went through all that, who, you know, broke barriers and were called the N-word at their jobs and, you know, disrespected. And, you know, I still have a lot of respect for boomers, and, you know what I'm saying? And we still have a lot of like the same issues and everything. And so, again, I don't want it to look as like I'm dunking on the boomers. That's not what I'm trying to do. I was just trying to explain, and my, you know, and my experience dealing with, you know, certain boomers in the community doing community organizing, and why I'm like, you know what, I had to unlearn certain things from them in order to try a new kind of perspective and a new way of organizing. Because again, you know, them doing a certain way for a while, it just hasn't panned out too fruitful, just, you know what I mean? And I just felt as if, you know, why don't we try a new direction? Why don't we try a new way? You know what I'm saying? And that's where I'm at with that. Like, it wasn't, you know, to disrespect the ancestors or disrespect, you know, the boomers. That's not what I'm trying to do at all. You know, I still got love for everybody, all the black boomers and everything, you know what I'm saying? And we'll get it right. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna get it right. We're gonna work on it. You know, there's way more boomers that I know that agree with me than disagree with me. And it's not like, you know, I'm not trying to push y'all into old folks' homes or, you know, the glue factory or whatever. Like, y'all cool, you know what I'm saying? Like, it ain't no issue like that. And so, yeah, but it's getting late. You know, I wanna wrap it up.
Do you want to close this out with any kind of final statements?
I want to thank everybody for their time. Thank you for tuning in. Stay safe during this pandemic, and, you know, try to stay active as far as, you know, getting new information going on. There's a lot going on in the world right now. And so I want y'all to keep staying educated and keep staying aware. I know it's kind of hard with a lot going on. People want to tune out. You know, I know it's a lot, but, you know, just keep updated on information, and just keep at it, and tap in with me if you have any questions, or if you ever want to help out or anything, just reach out to me. And thank you for your time again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alexander. Thank you so much to everyone that participated in this conversation. Lots of chopping going on, and lots of needed conversations around generational differences and approaches to political power and developing leadership on the grounds, and what is our future going to look like. And I hope that these conversations continue in your everyday discussions on the phone, on Zoom, through text, however it is that people are connecting these days, reach both ways, forward and back, right? And there's probably sides, and, you know, but we're, you know, both young and elder at the same time, or we're becoming elders, and we're remembering to like hold our inner child self. So thank you for speaking with conviction and honesty, and all the messiness of what comes up when we speak from where we stand. I'm gonna share a little bit of information here just to be able to share how we can continue to support the work that Alexander Dixon is doing. And so Tank's Pizza, located on New Braunfels Avenue. Good pizza. Stop by, get some pizza, get some wings, get a salad, and drop off some food. Any canned, boxed, beans, rice, can eat it for later, months later, please drop it off at Tank's Pizza. Whenever you're in the neighborhood, you can make a monetary donation to Alexander Dixon, specifically to support their work on the grounds with food rental, utility assistance for residents. As we know already, Black, Brown, Indigenous, migrant individuals, families, communities are being disproportionately affected by COVID. And so it's especially important to support Eastside residents where there are not as many COVID testing sites and of course not as many places to pick up emergency food. So please give as much as you can and reach out to Alexander directly through email, alexander.s.dixon@gmail.com. His digits are there. Tomorrow, there is a National Day of Action for Black Lives, a car caravan and food drive meeting at 11 a.m. at the AT&T Center, Lot 4, Gate D. Folks are encouraged to bring non-perishable food items and come with your car decked out with some signs, ready to honk your horns. Be in that celebratory San Antonio spirit, loud, rowdy, brown, Black, Indigenous folks that we all love. Then we have on Sunday, August 2nd, a action to close the camps, abolish ICE. This will take place in Pearsall, so perfect excuse opportunity to drive away, get to see a little bit of the countryside and support the closure of the detention centers. If you want more information, you can contact Yesenia Gomez and her phone number is at the bottom of that flyer. And please keep in touch with us. This is the East to West Project. We're all about these intersections. Where do our lives, our experiences cross over? Where are we connected? Where are we more the same? Where are the areas that we still need to have more conversations about, more work? How do we address colorism, anti-Blackness, nativism in our communities and in our shared struggles? Please keep in touch with us. Join us on Facebook. We have a group page called East to West. We have an email, east.west.210@gmail.com. You can sign up to receive communications through SurveyMonkey. Link is in the chat. And we also have a YouTube channel where you can see other presentations made by other artists on the subject of our interconnections, the intersections, and how do we apply that? We can do that through grassroots political organizing. We can also do that through science. We can do that through art making. Lots of different ways to exist and resist and create new imaginings for our future. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been CHOP Sessions, Ruminations of a Black Man Learning and Unlearning How to Build Leadership with Alexander Dixon. Any final words, Alexander Dixon, to see us off into the night?
Again, appreciate everybody's time. And again, we have way more in common than we have differences, and we'll figure this out. We're gonna make it happen.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Stay tuned, folks. Next month, August 29th, Saturday, 6 to 8 p.m., we'll be having our next presentation with Denise McVeigh, who is going to be sharing a little bit of the untold history behind the Texas Revolution, a progressive history lesson, who will be reading and discussing about unearthing the buried histories of POC, searching for historical facts hidden behind the legends, and illuminating the cost of fighting against inequality through her book that she wrote about the Yellow Rose of Texas called Making Myth and Emily. Again, this will be on August 29th, Saturday, 6 to 8 p.m. with Denise McVeigh, here again online with the East to West Project. Thank you so much for joining us. We will leave you here with Alexander Dixon's anthem song, Not Destiny's Child. Love.
Take money. West side, bad boy. Take money. You know who the realest is. Bring it to me. Take money. First off, in the clique you claim. West side, when we ride, come equipped with game. You claim to be